So I've done some insane challenges for this game called Cuphead, with the most recent one being where I tried 300%ing the entire thing without dying in 24 hours. Which to this day I feel that it was probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, next to asking a crush on a date in my high school, who of course totally didn't reject me and ended up dating my closest friend, and now they're happily married and I'm gonna be single forever. And you would think that I would stop there and move on with my merry life because I've had enough of the torture I bring upon myself with all these crazy challenges, right? Nay, as I still had one last challenge I want to do for the game to fully cement myself as the GOAT of Cuphead. And so today I'm gonna be doing what no gamer has dared to accomplish for this game, and that is to beat it without shooting. But before we jump right into it, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, as this videos take a ton of effort to make. Also, I recently started streaming where I play all my games before I post it here on YouTube, so if you want to catch me live, follow me on twitch.tv/SnazzyDan to join the fun. Anyways, without further ado, let's get right into the video. Now, the first thing most of you might be asking is how in the world will I be beating the game without shooting? But more importantly, what am I gonna use to get this impossible feat accomplished? Well, there's two possible ways to go about doing it, which is to use this charm called the Whetstone that transforms my parries into a damage dealing axe, or use this coffee charm to automatically charge up my super meter to either use my X moves or super art. But I won't be using any of them. Well, to be more specific, I won't be equipping them as charms, but instead use this overpowered charm called the Divine Relic that allows me to use both, which I happen to have gotten from my previous endeavors in beating the entire game. Twice. Man, I gotta touch some grass. It also comes with a variety of other charms like the Smoke Dash that gives me a tinge of invincibility, Heart Ring where my first, third, and sixth parries will grant me additional health points, and a sick after image effect that will undoubtedly drastically boost my gameplay by tenfold. In addition to all that, I'll also be making good use of the Digimi Cheat to double my HP because it'd be stupid not to. And after picking out the perfect charm and activating the Digimi Cheat, I attempted my first boss fight against Goopy Legrand, who was the easiest boss in this game. Well, that happened. Turns out when you can't shoot at him, even Goopy here becomes a bit more challenging. Not because it was actually hard per se, but because whetstoning this guy did minimal damage and waiting for my super beard to charge up felt like waiting for Christmas to arrive. Also, I had to be really careful when parrying him, since missing my timing by even a second would end up getting myself hit. But thanks to the surplus of health I had from the Digimi Cheat, I wasn't too worried. Where the heck did all my health go? And it doesn't get any better when you go into the second phase, as Goopy increases in size, in which you gotta be even more precise with your timing. But after you get through the first two phases, the last one is a breeze, as the only thing I had to look out for was when the Goop smashed his face on the ground, which honestly would be really embarrassing if I got it. I swear a bug just flew into my eye. And with a few X moves and this final parry, I beat the first boss of the game, which only took me 14 attempts. Now let's see how long it took to beat him. Hey, that's not too bad. This challenge might actually be a walk in the park. This is the most impossible challenge I've ever attempted! Yeah, it gets pretty insane later. Anyways, after beating Goopy, I went on to take on the Root Packs next. The first guy I had to take down was the Potato, and much like Goopy, the Veggie Trios are honestly supposed to be really easy. But again, since I can't shoot in this game, easy was the last thing I could say about them. Especially when I got to the part where I had to take on the Carrot and his Carrot missiles homing in on me. I first used my Chaser X move to try and shield them out, but after blocking a certain amount, it wasn't as effective. Then I tried to parry them, which looked like it was working at first, but apparently I still took a hit for a few of them. After that, I just went with the classic dodge or die tactic, where I tried to smoke dash away from them as best as I can. But with time, it just accumulated more and more missiles, and I wasn't getting anywhere. Until I tried smoke dashing across them, and what do you know, they just get destroyed when reaching the ground, which then gave me the brilliant idea to duck on the ground and smoke dash away from them to not take damage at all, as well as getting rid of the missiles while doing so, eventually beating out the Veggie Trios in the cheesiest way possible. Okay, this time it took a little longer, but I'm sure it won't be going into the double digits, right? Surely not when my next opponents were gonna be Ribby and Croaks, where now I was entering probably the more difficult part of the challenge. The beginning of the fight wasn't too bad, as I just had to evade the flaming fists Ruby hurled at me, until Croaks started spitting out the fireflies, where I started panicking because I wasn't able to clear them fast enough with the Whetstone. And when I couldn't clear them fast enough, I'd end up having to deal with the flaming fist at the same time, which made me lose a heart every cycle. Like, even with the insane amount of health pool I had, I'd lose most of them because of this troublesome combo. But after using a few supers and Whetstoning them, I managed to get to the second phase. And for this phase, it's not as crazy as the first one, because the only thing I needed to do was look out for the projectiles from Ribby. But once I got to the final phase was when I was in for quite a marathon. Reason being that the only time you can damage the big slot machine was when he deployed his spike platform. Plus, I couldn't Whetstone him anymore, which meant I had to wait for my super meter to fill up until I could use my super art, which sucks because it takes so freaking long. But with a bit of patience and not playing it too risky, I beat them eventually. Thank God I did, because I didn't want to spend another 16 minutes and 30 seconds. Next up was Hildeberg, who was the first plane battle in the game. And again, since I couldn't shoot her, I was in for a long fight. At first, I tried to find a way to cheese the whole thing by shoving myself in the top corner to wait for my super meter to fill up, but then I quickly realized that this was gonna only prolong the whole fight, so I went back to relying on my skills to parry the pink bullets to speed up the whole process. And that worked out a lot better for me as I only dropped around 4 health before entering the final phase, which then I proceeded to effortlessly dodge the UFO and the stars, at least for the first 10 seconds, and then use my super bomb to finish it off. Man, it just keeps increasing, doesn't it? At least I beat her on my first attempt. Now I just gotta do the same for this crazy plant here, and we'll be well on our way to entering the second island. Yeah, that wasn't gonna happen anytime soon because this manic flower was the biggest roadblock yet. And what I mean by this is, in my previous encounters against this guy, I used a finger gun called the Crackshot that had the properties of a homing bullet that basically annihilated every single one of Cagney's plant-like chompers. But because I couldn't do that anymore, I now had to get rid of them manually, which then I would end up losing so much health in the process. But as most of you know, when you repeat something a certain amount of times, you get used to it, which is what happened right here, where now I was basically a whetstoning connoisseur. After that comes the second phase, where now I had to deal with Cagney's 3 acorn projectiles and his sycamore seed boomerangs. But unlike the first phase, they weren't as overwhelming as the chompers. But then I forgot that after a while, he would bring them back on top of everything he threw at me, which had me struggling a little bit, but not enough to bring me down, baby. I died right as I entered the last phase. But now that I knew exactly what to expect, I got through the first and second phase a lot better this time, going into the last phase with a whopping 8 HP. And compared to the beginning, this phase is literally the easiest one, as I could see the rising vines and the pollen projectiles coming from a mile away, resulting in my eventual win against the floral beast. And look at that, it only took me just under 5 minutes to beat him. Actual time is around an hour if we're counting the many deaths that ensued along the way, but let's just say 5 so I don't go insane. Speaking of insane, did you guys know that you can purchase the games I play, including this one I'm playing right now, for free? That's right, and it's really easy to do if you head on over to freecash.com. In the website, when you click the tab that says earn, you can test out apps and complete surveys to literally receive free money. My go-to ones are the featured offers, which are usually the most completed and the best offers in your area. Like this one, for example, where all it takes is to download and use the app for some time to earn the easiest $1.50 of your life. But if you prefer to earn the big bucks instead, you can choose these ones that require you to complete several achievements to do just that. After doing so, you can click the cash out tab and pick whichever method you want to receive the money, and since I'm feeling pretty generous, here's a code you can redeem to buy any game on Steam under the price of $22. The website is fully legit with a score of 4.6 with over 30,000 reviews on Trustpilot, and the average time it takes to cash out is only 17 minutes. So if this tickles your fancy, check out the link in the description below and use code SHNAZYDAN when you sign up for a chance to win up to $250. Thank you freecash.com for sponsoring this video. Alright, back to the game. After defeating all the bosses in the first island, I was stoked to see that this challenge was going pretty well, where I started to think that this might actually be possible. However, that ignorant optimism was about to take a 180-degree turn for the worst, as there was a boss on this island that was gonna push me to the brink of despair. But before I get into that, let's go through the first 4 bosses, starting with whom I personally believe to be the most annoying boss in the game, and that was Baroness von Bonbon. And I say this because I genuinely don't like it when things chase me around, which was what Bonnie specialized in with her homing head spinners of torment. But before getting to that point, I first had to get through 3 of the 5 candy minions she sent out in the beginning of the battle. And honestly, they weren't any harder than when I could shoot at them, as most of them usually took a few whetstoning attacks and a couple of super arts to take them out. But I couldn't say the same for her last phase, as I had to constantly dodge her head that tracked me down for such a long time. And the reason it took such a long time was because I couldn't parry her anymore unless I wanted to risk being right in front of the danger zone where her head and Patsy the Mental spawned, which only left me with the option of waiting for my super meter to charge. And I think you can guess what that did to the 9 HP I had at the start. But good thing I went into that last phase with that 9 health, as I was able to beat her with 3 health remaining. It says 7 minutes, but it felt like 7 years. After Bonnie, it was on to the second playing battle of the game against the Jimmy the Great, who I thought was gonna be a ridiculously hard boss to beat because he had a whole lot of phases that wasn't so forgiving if you can't shoot at him. But funny enough, I happened to have stumbled upon a strat that turned the fight into an absolute cheese fest. Basically, I could just sneak behind him to evade all his projectile attacks instead of being in front, where it's much harder to do so, which allowed me to get in a ton of damage with my parries that helped to clear the first phase insanely fast. Then comes the second phase, where it gets a bit more tricky to break these pillar blocks, as I could only do so by whetstoning them. Lost on HP because of a poorly timed parry right here, but other than that, it wasn't too bad. After that comes the third phase, and since I found out that I could get behind the Jimmy in the first phase, I thought, hey, maybe I could do the same for this one as well. And what do you know, I was right on the dot, where I could hang out in the bottom right corner of the screen, wait for my super meter to charge, use my super art whenever I can, and rinse and repeat. As for the fourth phase, I could have done the same thing, but I didn't think I had to because it wasn't too hard dodging the turban shooting out the black beans and the Pinocchio's gumball bullets. Then comes the final phase of the fight, where at first I had a pretty hard time staying alive because I got slightly confused trying to position myself to not get hit by the dark beams the pyramids fired at me, as well as these psychic mind projectiles from the gem of the Jimmy's turban. But after a few more attempts, I found out I could just whetstone the heck out of his face like a shredder, and that resulted in the Jimmy's demise. Great, we're back to double digits again. Whatever, let's just get on with the next boss. I hate clowns. Oh, and how justified I was in saying that, because Beppy here is actually one of the hardest bosses to beat, even with a finger gun. And now that I couldn't use one, let's just say I was in for a real treat. And by treat, I mean I'm gonna die a lot. But since I could just edit that part out, here's the attempt that I beat him. For the first phase, it was paramount that I parried the ducks above me if I didn't want to get hit by them whenever Beppy rushed towards me in her bumper car. Then in the second phase, the difficulty ramps up a bit as I now had to get rid of the canine balloon heads while being aware of when the roller coaster started heading my way. But thanks to my pro gaming skills, it was just another day at the office for me. Actually, this was one of the better attempts I had, but we don't have to talk about that. Then comes the third phase where I run into a bit of a pickle as I unfortunately couldn't whetstone against Beppy, as doing so would for some odd reason had me take damage before I could get off a hit on him. So I went with the good old strat of patiently waiting for my stupid super meter that takes forever to charge up. And after using it a couple more times, it was time for the last phase, which actually went a lot better than I had expected, as I was able to use my whetstone again to axe away at Beppy and also the green penguins he spawned, reducing the amount of baseballs I had to deal with, which eventually led to a flawless victory. Okay, close enough. Once I beat Beppy, it was time to hop back on the plane to take down the soon-to-be Thanksgiving dinner of a bird named Wally Warbles. And no, I'm not saying that to be cheeky, as he literally gets eaten by these psychotic carnivores later. The beginning of the battle starts out with Wally puking out these eggshells, where all it took for me to evade them was to fly in between the spaces of when it broke off into smaller pieces. Next was dodging a whole lot of Wally's feather attacks, where it may look daunting at first, but all I had to do was shake myself, which boosted up my mobility speed, allowing me to easily move my way through them. After that came the part where I usually mess up the most, and that's when this little birdie spontaneously shoots out these electric bullets that I had to be ready to parry, which I kind of missed a couple of times, and also squeeze through his inner circle of spiky eggs to damage him using the whetstone, which is kind of difficult when he doesn't freaking stay still. But although I struggled a little in this phase, I still went into the next one with 4 health, which was good enough for me to tank a couple of hits and use my super bomb to finish him off. Alright, enjoy your meal, guys. With Wally sent off to KFC, I now had one last boss to take down to enter the third island. And what I thought was gonna take a few attempts to clear ended up becoming a grueling climb out of a pit that drove me to near insanity. And here's why. You see, my next opponent was Green Matchstick, who I used to absolutely slay with this finger gun called the Charge, where I could beat him in less than 2 minutes, get a perfect score, and do so while on expert mode. But to beat him now without that luxury pushed my patience beyond heights I didn't think was reachable. And what I mean by this is, until now, every boss had a phase where there was something I could parry to fill my super meter up, or whetstone the boss to speed up the process to defeat them. But Greemy here, aside from the pink ring he occasionally shot in the first phase, had nothing I could parry for the second and the third phase. And to try and wait for my super meter to charge for these 2 phases was insurmountably horrid. Why, you ask? Well, for starters, I needed to fire 6 super arts at the guy in the second phase, which took an average time of 9 minutes. And 2, I had to dish out another 7 super arts in the final phase, which took another 10 minutes. And do you know how difficult it is to constantly dodge these marching fireballs that jump in different heights and patterns in a multitude of endless fire orbs for a total of 20 minutes for God knows how many attempts? Probably not, because no one's dumb enough to try this challenge other than me. Anyways, the point is, I wasn't doing so hot. Like, even when I managed to salvage up 7 HP in the final phase, I still freaking lost. And I 300%ed this game with all S ranks twice. Words could not express my frustration at the time, but despite it all, I've been through a lot worse, so I wasn't about to give in to something as trivial as spending an hour or 2 to get through this stepping stone of a boss. This was a mistake, is what I would say. But seeing that I was almost 2/3 of the way to finishing, I picked myself back up with the determination to see through this insufferable challenge. With that said, let's move on to the third island, where awaited another moving platform level that was run by the queen of the beast called Rumor Honeybottom. One thing that really made this level annoying was when I tried to go for the whetstone attack against the officer bee and take a hit instead, all because the distance between me and the bee gets too close from the platforms descending. But that was mostly due to my impatience of wanting to finish this challenge quicker, which actually had the opposite effect. So I sucked it up and returned to being a careful Andy and managed to move on to the second phase and even had a whopping 8 HP to, never mind, make that 7. Now for this phase, I wasn't too worried because all I had to do was be attentive enough towards the platforms around me to not fall into the honey pit below, all the while dodging this really slow pink sphere, rotating triangle that shot 3 smaller triangles, and bee-like bullets, which to be frank was a walk in the park. But as soon as I got past that, the difficulty level shot all the way to the other end of the spectrum, where now I had to take on a bunch of homing fists and a saw attack that swung all the way across the screen, all the while trying to damage her with the whetstone. And you can see how much I struggled against them as my HP dwindled rapidly. But not enough for me to bite the bullet, as I was able to barely beat her with 2 HP remaining. The next one I went for was Warner Werman and his friend Kitty Cat that was prowling outside the wall. The beginning of the fight against the rat was simple enough, as most of his attacks were fairly easy to maneuver, where I just need to parry this piece of gum to get past the catapulted objects, hop around to avoid the cherry bombs, and smoke dash whenever he rushed at me. However, the phase after that was definitely a bit more complicated, since using the whetstone against burner, and trying not to get hit by all these bottle caps that randomly lunged in and out was a lot more than I could handle. Luckily though, I was a good enough gamer to only lose 3 HP before going into the next phase, which now involved looking out for these rat ghosts chucking these pink orbs at me, wooden planks falling from the ceiling, and evading the kitty paw slamming the floor. But unlike the second phase that was a bit cramped and stuffy, this one had a bit more of an open space for me to move around, which made dodging a lot more manageable, resulting in a knockout that was fairly quick. The next boss I took on was Captain Brineybeard, who most would think is a bundle of chaos because there's so much going on at one time. But as someone who's already been doing an ungodly amount of dodging for the past 17 hours, anything this Rump Ranger did wasn't gonna faze me whatsoever. Did I mention I've been playing this game for 17 hours straight? But in all seriousness, the first 2 phases for this sad excuse of a pirate who made everything but himself fight for him was generally very easy to anticipate so long as I stayed on my toes. And after you get through the first 2 phases, you just have to cozy up right in the spot to avoid the swirling bubbles containing something I'll just leave to your imaginations, and parry this hyper beam of an attack like a trampoline to charge up the super meter to douse him with my X moves, which got me the dub. After Briny, I decided to take on Sally's stage play next, and if you don't know, the one thing that a lot of the players have trouble with when facing her is trying to get an S rank, because the only way to do so is to parry this pink rose in her final phase. But since I only needed to beat her without shooting, let's just say she became officially the easiest boss on this island. Other than a bit of trolling that almost cost me the win right here, I pulled myself together and clutched it up in the end. Now so far, I've gotten fairly good at using all the movesets required to successfully complete this challenge, whether that be parrying, being agile, and having the patience of a monk who reached nirvana as I wait for my super meter to charge. But despite those things working out for me until now, the next few bosses were going to be a totally different ballgame, as I was gonna need to actually use some special strats and gimmicks to get through them. Trust me, it gets pretty nutty. Anyways, the first one on the list was Kali Maria, who I would consider to be quite an easy boss to beat, right up to the point of getting to the last phase where I need to finish her off before I die to her petrifying stone gazing. But the strat of putting out as much damage in a short span of time only worked when I could shoot her, and since I couldn't do that anymore, I succumbed to failure numerous times. Retries after retries, things weren't looking too promising as I wasn't making any progress at all. This was actually the first time I'd ever felt stuck throughout the whole challenge, and I didn't have a clue what to do. However, I discovered something that absolutely blew my mind. And by discovered, I mean I looked this up on YouTube, so shout out to whoever this guy is. And basically, what I found was that you can fly really close to Kali's head and not take a single damage, which was an absolute game changer, where by applying that very method, I was able to just infinitely whetstone her till I got away with the win. After beating Kali came the next incredibly difficult obstacle I had to conquer, which was Dr. Cal and his trusty robot that I wasn't at all looking forward to fighting because I knew what was coming, which was a whole lot of this and this and this and this, and I think you get the point. Now, when it came to beating this hunk of metal, I always went with the foolproof plan of taking out this antenna first, then the drone spawning area, and then the chest area. But again, that was when I could leisurely shoot at the guy, and with that not being an option anymore, I was gonna have to put in a bit more effort into it. For starters, I took down the antenna as usual, and then thought long and hard on which area I should destroy next while dealing with all this crap. If I destroyed the bottom area first, then I'd have to deal with a homing missile that had a huge explosive radius when it blew up. If it was vice versa, then a giant arm appears from the side and releases these energy balls all over the place. But after a few more minutes of brainstorming, I thought, hey, why not just destroy them both at the same time with my super bomb? Which is exactly what I did, and the craziest thing happened where the homing missile of the robot got stuck and didn't come out, giving me the opportunity to take advantage of it to get through the first phase. As for the second phase, it just came down to tapping into my inner monk again, where all it took to get through it was fly in a circle to dodge the homing missiles and use my super art whenever I could. And then comes the last phase where it was a bit of a slug, but by shrinking myself to become more nimble and parry these pink radial orbs whenever I can, it was only a matter of time before I brought down the mad scientist. But there stood one very last boss on this island that had me lose all the confidence I built up until now. One that I hardly thought was going to be of any nuisance, considering my history of absolutely trouncing him in my previous battles. And it was none other than the Phantom Express. The fight begins with the scrawny Casper chucking his ghastly eyeballs at me. And again, with a finger gun, getting rid of all of this would be a piece of cake. But without it, let's just say it was actually genuinely impossible. Like, I tried dodging them to the best of my abilities and died. I tried getting rid of as many of them with the whetstone, but still died. I even tried searching for areas where I could maybe find a glitch or two, but to no avail, I died. And even when I did my best to stall for time and charge up my super meter to use my super art to clear them, by the time it was close to being charged up again, you've guessed it, I died. But with all that I've accomplished so far, I really just couldn't help but think that if I kept at it long enough, I'd eventually break through this barrier. So I kept trying and trying and trying some more. But much to my chagrin, it seemed as though this was truly the end of the road. But then moments before I was about to call it quits, I gave it one last try in hopes of a miracle. And in this very moment, I tried going with a different approach where I used my X moves instead of my super art. And out came a linear electrical charge beam that eradicated more than half of the swaying eyeballs in an instant. And that's when I knew that with this new method, the tables have completely turned in my favor, where I was able to finally get past this nightmare of a phase, moving on to dominating the rest of the battle shortly after. And by overcoming the last boss of the third island, it was finally time to enter the underworld, where only 2 bosses remained for the completion of this challenge. The first one I needed to take down was King Dice and his 9 lackeys, so I only needed to beat 3 of them to get to him. But before I went ahead and rolled the dice to face it, I first thoroughly analyzed all 9 mini bosses, as some were a lot tougher than the others. And by running simulations after simulations in my head, I decided to go with Chips Bedekin, Hocus Pocus, and Piruleta, which were all bosses that didn't require a whole lot of effort to beat, as all their attacks were easily avoidable with a well-timed smoke dash, and I could Westone them to beat them quicker, as opposed to ones that are a lot harder to do so. But in light of all that, I still couldn't let my guard down, as more often than not, I messed up quite often against the Big Dice and his card attacks. However, I don't know if it was the sheer adrenaline that was coursing through my veins or the 24 plus hours of playing this game, but I was able to somehow not take a single damage for the whole duration of my fight with him, where I was still left with an entire 7 HP after getting that knockout. And with King Dice out of the way, the only boss that stood between me and beating this challenge was the Devil. The battle began with the evil Overlord unleashing all kinds of sorcery and shapeshifting that had me stay vigilant at all times. I put everything I had on each movement and played my absolute best, where I managed to only lose a single HP going into the next phase. And before entering the hole to meet the Devil in his final form, I knew that the flaming walls wouldn't encroach all the way to the middle, enabling me to wait for my super meter to fully charge. And after doing so, I then jumped into the hole, following it up with an immediate usage of my super art. Then I continued to give it my all by carefully evading the rotating axe, dashing away from the flaming poker chip, and parrying the pink bats. Once I got through all that, came what I believed to be the ultimate test of my skills, where I had to survive as long as possible from a cluster of attacks coming from every direction. But luckily, I had my super meter fully charged up again from parrying the pink bats in the previous phase, which I made sure to trigger right as I was about to get hit by a skull. And by doing so, I got rid of the Devil's henchman on the right, which allowed me to get in just enough damage to get to the very last phase. From the looks of how many HP I had at the time, it seemed as though I was well on my way to sealing the deal. But one thing I didn't take into account was that I couldn't damage the giant devilish head with my whetstone, because his hitbox was way too high up. And because of that, I had to resort to filling up my super meter by either waiting it out or parrying the pink tears on the side. But thanks to the insane amount of HP I garnered up to this point, it was more than enough for me to let the rest play out for what may very well be the greatest performance I've ever displayed for this game, leading to my eventual victory and beating this ridiculously difficult run and gun game without shooting. Hope you guys enjoyed watching, and if you want to see more insane gaming challenges, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Anyways, that's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.